Hello, I'm Whalley, welcome to Lenscraft. If you've been involved in photography for more than just a few years, you'll realise that our photography tastes change over time. I've gone to look at some of my earlier images and I can see this really clearly, so I thought what would be a good idea in today's video is to demonstrate how we can reprocess some of these older images using the new technologies we've got today. I'm going to show you this first image. At the time this was shot, I know it was considered a good image at the time because it actually featured in the Landscape Photographer of the Year competition back in 2007 and was in the final exhibition. Now when I look at it, I actually cringe. At the time this was captured, I was shooting predominantly with Fuji Velvia, although this is a digital image. And because I was shooting with really contrasty slide film, I thought that's how digital images should look. And now when I look at this, I realise I don't like it anymore. My taste has changed, and I think the taste of a lot of people in photography has also changed. And this image, which was once considered good, is probably now unacceptable, and I certainly can't see anyone saying, wow, that's fantastic. The shadows are too dark, the colours are too intense, you can't see any of the detail that we now come to expect using today's cameras. Let me show you the RAW file. Now the image you were looking at was processed in Photoshop at the time. That's actually all I had. The Lightroom really wasn't about, I don't think, and if it was really very basic. We certainly didn't have a lot of the plugins that we've got today. If you look at the information we've got on here, you'll see that it was actually shot back in 2006 using an EOS 300D Canon camera. Now at the time this was the first really affordable digital camera to hit the market. The resolution itself is only 3072 pixels by 2048. It was a 6 megapixel camera and it really was cutting edge at the time. If you go back to the original processed image, you can see the similarity between the two, but the colours are just too intense, too much like Velvia. I'm now going to try and reprocess this, and I'm going to use On1 Photo RAW. The first thing I'm going to do is take it into the develop module, and in there I'm going to try to correct some of the colour cast which is being shown on the image, and I'm just showing the levels or histogram here so that you can see what's going on. Really, there's too much pink in this scene as it stands. Because of that, I'm going to reduce the tint and move that much further over into the green. And we may need to come back and actually check this again when we've done some further adjustments. But that actually corrects quite a lot of that cast. The boats themselves, if you've seen them, they are a deep yellowy orangey red colour, which is more like you're seeing on screen now than they were previously. First thing I'm going to do is actually tackle the midtones in the image to try to open up some of the shadow areas. As I do that, it's probably pushing the highlights too far over to the right of the histogram, and so they're becoming too white. We'll tackle that shortly. At the moment, I just want to create a balance for the bulk of the image. I'm also going to pull down the highlights though, just to deal with some of that, and I'm going to open up the shadows just that little bit further and add in a bit of structure. And I can pull down this haze slider, and if you've ever used that, it's quite good for tackling some of these areas that are blown out, but it does intensify the colour quite a lot, so we may need to adjust that further still in a moment. If I come down to the sharpening and I zoom in on the image, I'm going to apply quite a lot of sharpening to this because the lens is a little bit soft. I had a habit at the time of stopping down the lens really as far as it would go almost, just to get the depth of field, and I didn't realise that it was causing diffraction in my image. Now when I go back and look at the RAW files, I can see that, and I need to actually push the sharpening quite hard just to try to tackle that. I'm going to increase the threshold just slightly, and the reason for that is the sharpening may be causing noise to be exaggerated in some of these areas. Going back to the exposure, I can see that the image is looking a little bit better. I'm going to reduce the contrast slightly and just increase the exposure. I can always come back to address that later. Looking at the screen now, what I see is a problem in these shadow areas here. I want to actually pull out some of the detail in there. Back in the original image, that had gone to pure black, and I don't really like that. I want to retain some of the detail. The way I'm going to do that is over in the local adjustment tab. First thing I need to do is make a selection, and I'm going to use the paint in mode on the adjustment brush here to make a selection. And as I paint, you can see the selection being made. Now I've just realised I'm painting without the magic brush on, so I'm going to undo that. I'm going to select the magic brush or the perfect brush, and I'm going to let that do the bulk of the selection for me. And then over on the other side, I'm doing exactly the same. The brush makes a really good job of selecting those darker areas. I've also got the opacity set at 60, and that allows me to go over and select some of the darker areas again and just build up that selection so that I can adjust the foreground and background detail, or the midground and background detail, slightly separately. Over here you can actually see the adjustment that's been created, and I'm just going to use this feather to blur it down a little bit to help blend the adjustment. Now that I've made my selection, I can actually increase my exposure in that area. I can open the shadows further, and I'll add in a little bit of contrast as well. A small amount of vibrancy just to increase the colour in that area, and a little bit of structure. Now what I don't want to do is make that area appear unnaturally bright or too saturated, and at the moment I think it's looking just a little bit too bright, so I'm going to pull down the shadows just slightly. That's looking much better. Next we're going to tackle the sky, because that's looking a bit too light in this area and also here as well. And to do that, I'm just going to add a new layer, and this time I'm going to make a selection with the adjustment gradient, and we'll add that in, and there we can see it's adjusting the area. I want this to focus largely on the sky. And that's balanced out the exposure between the sky and the reflection quite well. The reflection should really be darker than the sky, but that's not too bad. Now I can also clean up this mask a little bit if I need to, using the adjustment brush. And at the moment some of the hills are being a little bit darkened by the mask that we've created. What I'm going to do is switch this now to paint out, and I'm just going to paint out the darkening effect that's on the hills. And then we have the adjustment done. Let's compare that now to the starting image. As you can see already, we've created quite a dramatic change from what we had previously. I'm now going to go over into the effects panel, where I'm going to start to add some of the filters. And the first one I want to add is one of the tone enhancers. And this tone enhancer I'm going to use to try to enhance the tones in the boats. And I just want to make sure that the exposure of that is a little bit darker. I want a little bit more contrast, and I definitely want some more clarity and detail in the boat and also this foreground here, but I don't want it to affect the sky. Now, at the moment, that's not looking too bad as an adjustment. We can compare it to the original, and that's just giving it a little bit of bite. What I'm now going to do is create a mask so that I can actually adjust this. I'm going to use the masking bug here, and I'm going to make sure that I select this linear top, and that will be to mask out the sky so that our adjustment is only occurring here. And again, you can see that on the mask if I show it there. I may actually also mask out the effect on the water here, so I can go back to the brush, I can use paint out. I'm just going to set my feather down a little bit, and also the size of the brush I'll reduce, and we'll use the perfect brush tool again. And that's really just to make sure that I take out in general the adjustments from the water. I don't need to take everything out, I just need to reduce the adjustment. So as I paint there, you should be able to see it actually appearing over here on the mask. And that's probably taken out in as much of the tone adjustment that I want to from that area. That's improved the boats. We're now going to add a colour enhancer filter. And here I'm going to see if we can push the boats further over to the blue, or whether they need to go more to the orange in the scene. So if we push over to the blue, we see we get a much more natural colour. We possibly need a little bit more pink in there, just a small amount, and reduce the colour temperature. Now, the reason I'm doing that in this colour enhancer is that the adjustment is much more forgiving than back in the develop module. The develop module allows you, even with a small movement, to have a big impact. This is less sensitive and it's better suited for fine tuning. If I go to the oranges now, in here we can also tackle these oranges at the same time. We can actually change the hue of them to make them more yellow, and we can reduce the saturation and also the brightness to some degree in those areas. And we can increase the red in the scene and move that more over to the purple side of the hue. And again, we can reduce our brightness down. Let's look at that against the original. The new one's looking much better. Next, I'm going to add a glow effect. And the reason I like the glow effect is because it helps create an intensity of colour and make an image seem a little bit darker. And it's perfectly suited for these sunset scenes. And all we need to do is push up a little bit of the amount slider to introduce some glow. We can adjust the halo and actually make the glow softer. So you can see the effect that that's having there, and we can fine tune the glow if we want to with the opacity slider. And that's looking much more like a natural evening shot now. Finally, I'm going to add the vignette, and I'm going to start with the big softy. That's a really nice soft vignette, and I'm going to first off pull the feather slider right over so I can see where I'm positioning the vignette, and I'm going to push it to around there. Now I can go back to a large feather, and I can control the brightness to see how much I actually need to reduce it by. I don't need to reduce it much, and it's having a really great effect on the image. I also prefer a slightly rounder vignette for this scene. And that looks good. There's my original. There's my adjusted version. I'm happy with that. I'll now export the image, and I'm going to save that now back to the hard disk. I can now go back to the browse and we can see our 3 images. This is the DNG RAW file that I was adjusting. I'm just going to reset that now. This was the original image in Photoshop. So there's the original image as I'd processed it in Photoshop back in 2006. There was the RAW file, and there's the new file I've created from it. I'm sure you'll agree that's now much more in line with today's photographic tastes. It's certainly more in line with what I would want to produce. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so, and please share the video with others. I'll see you next week for another video.